Once upon a time, there were two best friends. Their names were Lolaja and Yusefi. Lolaja was full of fun, a little daredevil, always off having adventures, always getting into scrapes. And Yusefi, her very best friend, was a quieter boy, but a very loyal one. Everywhere Lolaja went, Yusefi went too. He would never let her down. They were always out and about, playing and laughing, here, there, and everywhere in the village. Well, not quite everywhere. There was one place where they weren't allowed to play. Outside the village, there was a deep, dark forest, and no one ever went in there. People said there was a ghoul that lived in the forest, a terrible giant, a monster with sharp claws and fangs and blazing eyes like coals in the darkness. And they were told never, ever to go and play in there. Well, Lolaja, the daredevil, tell Lolaja she can't do something, and she would have to do it. And one day she said to Yusefi, "Come on, Yusefi, let's go. Let's go in the forest, because I'm sure there must be some really good fruit in there that no one's picked." Yusefi didn't want to go. Oh, Lolaja, no, no. The ghoul. Oh, I don't care about the silly old ghoul, said Lolaja. And before Yusefi could say any more, off she went into the forest, running as fast as her feet would carry her. Yusefi, the loyal friend, went wherever Lolaja went, and so he followed after. By the time he caught up with her, she was deep in the forest. She was already climbing a tree, and he stood at the foot of the tree and watched as she went up, 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 up the trunk, along a branch, and there was a lovely apple, shining and ripe and gorgeous. And Lolaja reached up with her hand to grab it, and as her hand touched the apple's skin, there was a terrible roar of thunder, and lightning flashed, and the trees of the forest shook, and here came the ghoul. And it was true what they'd said. He had terrible claws and terrible teeth, and his eyes blazed like coals in the night. And the ghoul shouted, "You, child, you've taken my apple. Now I will take you." And he snatched Lolaja from the tree, tucked her under his arm, jumped into the air, and flew away. So fast it all happened, Yusefi could barely keep up with what was going on. He stood at the bottom of that tree and he just looked up. Where was Lolaja? What had become of her? Well, he was a loyal friend and he wasn't going home without her. And so he walked on through the forest, wondering where the ghoul had taken his friend, thinking maybe he could find her. And as he walked along, he called out, "Lolaja, Lolaja, where are you? It's me, your friend Yusefi. I'll never let you down." But there was no reply. There was no sound at all. It was as quiet as the grave in that forest. No birds, no animals. Just little Yusefi, all alone, walking on, looking for his friend. He walked on and on. The minutes turned to hours. The hours turned to night. And when he could walk on no longer, he was so tired and hungry. He couldn't stop himself. He just had to lie down. And he closed his eyes. And before he knew it, he was fast asleep and having terrible dreams about the awful ghoul with the blazing eyes. He woke up with the feeling of someone's hand on his arm, and he sat up suddenly, and maybe the ghoul had come and got him. And he found himself looking up into the face of a lovely, sweet old man. The old man had twinkling eyes and a friendly smile and long white hair and a long, long, long white beard. And he looked like the kindest soul Yusefi had ever seen. The old man was shaking him awake and saying, "Yusefi, wake up, come on. I know you're looking for Lolaja. Let's have something to eat, and then I'll tell you where to find her." Yusefi sat up and looked all around. And to his surprise, he wasn't in the forest. He was in a clearing. He was sure he hadn't been in a clearing when he fell asleep. But here he was now, and it was lovely. The sun was shining down, the grass was green and lush, the gentle buzzing of insects, the sound of bird song. And there on the grass, the lovely old man had set out an amazing picnic of all of Yusefi's favourite foods. Come along, said the old man, come and eat, and tell me all your troubles. Well, Yusefi sat and ate. He couldn't help but trust the old man. He had such a kind face, and it seemed that he already knew what Yusefi's troubles were. But Yusefi told him about Lolaja and what a daredevil she was, and how the ghoul had come and taken her away. And the old man said, "Yes, she has been taken by the ghoul. I'm sorry, but it's going to be all right because you're a good boy and a loyal friend, and I know that you will never let her down. So when you finished your lunch, all you have to do is follow that path." And he pointed to a path that led out of the clearing, "and go up this mountain." And he pointed up. And Yusefi looked and saw a mountain he'd never seen before. "Follow the path up the mountain," said the old man, "and at the top you'll find the castle, and the castle's where the ghoul lives, and that's where he's keeping Lolaja. Hurry now, because the ghoul's not home just yet. If you're quick, you'll get Lolaja before the ghoul gets back." Well, Yusefi didn't need to be told twice. He jumped to his feet and he was ready to run along that path and up that mountain to find his friend, when the old man called him back and said, "No, wait, I forgot something. I forgot something really important." And the old man plucked from his chin 3 of the long white hairs of his long white beard, and he gave them to Yusefi and said, "Keep hold of these. You're going to need them later." Now, of all the strange things the old man had said and done, this was the strangest of all. And Yusefi said, "What do you mean? What can I use these for?" "Don't worry," said the old man. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do. Just keep hold of them." Well, he'd been so kind and he seemed to know so much that Yusefi kept the hairs and folded them up and put them in his pocket. And then off he ran, through the path the old man had shown him, and up the mountain, up, up, up the mountain, a long spiral path. And the higher he climbed, the colder the air grew, the thicker the cloud, until it was like a fog. And when he got to the very top, there, sure enough, was a huge, tall castle. So tall, immense, built for a giant. Little Yusefi, such a small boy, he crept through the open doors of the castle and he felt like an ant, dwarfed by the size of everything. The corridors were long and dark and echoing. The halls were huge, so enormous that he couldn't see from one side to the other. Enormous staircases climbed up and up and up into high, high turrets. Deep staircases plunged down, down, down into the very bottom of the castle, the cellars in the bowels of the mountain. Now the old man had told Yusefi that the ghoul wasn't home, and so Yusefi ran from room to room and cried out, "Lolaja, Lolaja, are you here? Where are you? It's me, Yusefi, your friend. I'll never let you down." There was no answer, just the echo of his own voice in those great halls. Down the corridors he flew, through the halls, up the stairs and down, and when he'd gone down, 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 as far as he could go, into the lowest basement of the castle, and called, "Lolaja, Lolaja, are you here? It's me, Yusefi." Oh, he was so relieved to hear the sound of Lolaja's voice, calling back, "Yusefi, I knew you'd come for me. You're such a good friend. Come on, I'm in here, I'm in here." And he followed the sound of her voice to a door, and the door was so huge. The key was in the lock, and the key was far above his head. He had to reach up high on his tiptoes to get it, but he did, and he turned that key. And with his shoulder, he pushed this heavy door open, and there on the other side stood his friend Lolaja with that great big grin on her face. They were so thrilled to see each other. They hugged, and they laughed, and they danced for joy. And Lola just said, "Yusefi, I knew you'd come." And Yusefi said, "Of course I came." But we have to hurry, Lolaja, he said, because the ghoul's away now, but he'll be back any minute. We have to go, we have to go. And so they took each other's hand and they began to run back up the stairs to the way out of the castle. And as they ran, the stairs began to shake and shudder beneath their feet, and the walls began to groan and rock. And they got to the top of the stairs and they got to the hall and they began to run through the hall, and the floor of the hall shook and trembled, and the walls of the hall screeched and groaned. And when they got to the front door, the door screamed aloud. Ghoul, Ghoul, oh master, come back quickly, the children are running away. They were horrified and they just ran all the faster through that door and across the courtyard towards the path that led down the mountain. And the whole castle was shaking and thundering and shouting with all its might, Ghoul, Ghoul, our master, come quickly, the children are running away. And then the sky turned dark. There was a flash of lightning, a roar of thunder, and there was the Ghoul, with his terrible claws and his terrible teeth and his blazing eyes like coals in the darkness. And the Ghoul shouted, You, children, I will take you both. You will never get away. Lolaja and Yusefi took to their heels. They ran down that mountain path as fast as their legs would take them, but they could hear the Ghoul coming behind them, his great feet thundering on the path. They could hear his breath. They could almost feel those claws at their back. And Lolaja cried, Yusefi, Yusefi, what can we do? And then Yusefi remembered the hairs the old man had given him, and he took the first one from his pocket and held it up and looked at it, and it shimmered and shone, and he turned and threw it at the Ghoul behind him. The hair landed at the Ghoul's feet, and when it touched the ground, it turned into a great field of swords, terrible, sharp swords with their blades sticking up out of the ground like spikes. The Ghoul would have to run across those swords to get to the children. And Yusefi thought, this is going to stop him. But no, the swords didn't stop him. The Ghoul was too determined and too terrible. The Ghoul ran across the swords. They cut his feet, they cut his legs. He screamed and howled as he ran, but he kept running. He was coming after them. And the children turned back and they kept running down the mountain, down, 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 as fast as they could, the Ghoul coming after, his feet thundering on the path. They could almost feel those claws again at their back, and Lolaja cried, Yusefi, Yusefi, what can we do? And Yusefi took the second hair from his pocket and he held it up, and it gleamed and glistened, and he turned behind him and threw it at the Ghoul. It sailed through the air and landed at the Ghoul's feet, and when it hit the ground, it turned into a lake, a huge lake as wide as a sea, with blue waves lapping and rolling. And Yusefi thought, this will stop him. The Ghoul had to wade through that lake to get to the children. And wade he did. He came in through the water. It rose to his knees and he kept on walking. It rose to his waist and it kept on walking. It rose to his neck, and the Ghoul kept on walking towards the children through the water until he came out of the other side of the lake, dripping wet and absolutely furious. Children, you can't stop me, he shouted, and he came after them again. The children turned and ran down that mountain as fast as they could, and the Ghoul was behind them with his terrible claws and his blazing eyes, and they could feel those claws at their back. And Lolaja cried, Yusefi, Yusefi, we're done for, we're done for. And Yusefi had one last hair, and he took it from his pocket and it held it up, and it was bright and brilliant, and he turned and threw it at the Ghoul. And this time, when it landed at the Ghoul's feet, it turned into a great wall of flame. The ghoul's clothes caught fire. His claws were burning. His hair was on fire. He was screaming in rage and pain. And Yusefi thought, now he's going to stop. And stop he did. But he had one last terrible trick up his sleeve, this terrible, terrible ghoul. As he stood there with his hair burning, his clothes burning, his claws burning, he reached out towards them and he screamed, "Children, you've defeated me, but you will never be happy. I curse you. I curse you both. Lolaja, you will be a dirty dog that creeps on the ground. And Yusefi, you will be an eagle that flies in the sky and can never land on the earth. You will never be human ever again, and you will never walk by each other's side. I curse you." And with that, he crumbled into ash and faded away. The children looked at each other. When Lolaja looked at Yusefi, she saw an eagle high in the sky, circling above. And when Yusefi looked down at Lolaja, he saw a scruffy little dog with dirty paws. The curse had come true already. Well, what could they do? Lolaja was longing to go home to see her mother, and Yusefi, the faithful friend, was definitely going home with her. And so the two children made their way down the mountain, through the forest, and back to the village. And by the time they got back to the village, it was night, and they went to Lolaja's mother's house. And Lolaja, the little dog, crept in through the door and climbed the stairs, and there was her mother, fast asleep in bed. And even though she was asleep, her face was so sad, so sad. All this time, she had thought that her Lolaja was lost. She'd never come home from her day out, and her mother didn't know what had become of her. She was heartbroken. And Lolaja felt sad too. She wished that she had come home as a human girl to make her mother happy again. On her little paws, she crept back down the stairs, and she looked around her home. And she could see that something was very wrong here. The house had always been so light, so clean, so airy, but now everything was just fallen into ruin. The floor was dirty, there was dust in the corners, the windows were dirty, there were dishes in the sink. Lolaja's mother had been so full of despair that she hadn't cared about anything anymore. She hadn't taken care of the house. She'd just been crying. Well, thought Lolaja, I can't make her happy by coming home as a human girl, but at least I can help her a little bit. And so, with her little dog's paws, she took a scrubbing brush and scrubbed the floors and cleaned the windows. And she took a dishcloth in her mouth and she washed the dishes, and she made the whole house as clean and tidy as she could. And when she'd finished, she went out into the garden and curled up under a tree and went to sleep with her friend Yusefi, the eagle, flying up ahead to keep watch. When Lolaja's mother came downstairs in the morning, she couldn't believe her eyes. The house was so clean, it was spick and span. Someone had crept into the house in the night time while she slept and cleaned everything. Who on earth would do that? It was very strange. And the next night the same thing happened. Lolaja's mother went to bed, went to sleep. Lolaja the dog crept into the house and she cleaned and polished and she scrubbed everything. And when she'd finished, she went out and slept under the tree while Yusefi flew up above. And her mother came down in the morning, and again, amazement. Something very magical here. Lolaja's mother decided to find out what it was. So on the third night, she stayed awake. She just pretended to sleep in the bed, and the little dog crept in, and she heard the pitter-pat of the paws on the stairs. And then she heard the pat and pitter of the paws downstairs as the dog cleaned the house. And Lolaja's mother very quietly got up and came downstairs, just in time to see Lolaja the dog, who'd finished all her chores, running out into the garden to curl up under her tree. And while Lolaja's mother watched, she saw an eagle flying high above, and the little dog calling up to the eagle and talking in a human voice. Yusefi, Yusefi, how are things in the sky? And the eagle calling down, they're good, Lolaja, they're good, but I'm so sorry I can't be with you. How are things on the ground? How is your mother? And Lolaja replied, she's so sad. Of course, Lolaja's mother understood immediately. This was Lolaja and Yusefi, and some magic had turned them into animals. She ran down the garden and she scooped up that dog and held it in her arms and kissed it and cuddled it. And she called up to the eagle, Yusefi, is that you? What's happened to you both? And while Lolaja the dog snuggled in her mother's arms, Yusefi explained and told her everything that had happened. He told her all about the apple tree and the ghoul and the castle and the mountain, and he told her about the kind old man in the clearing in the forest. And when she heard that, Lolaja's mother laughed and said, Yusefi, you silly boy, don't you see? That kind old man was a good wizard, and all we have to do is go and find him now, and he'll take this curse off you. Do you think you can find your way? Well, Yusefi was an eagle. He could fly over the forest and he could look down and see where the clearing was. And he came back, and then he led Lolaja and Lolaja's mother through the forest to the clearing. Lolaja's mother holding onto the little dog in her arms. And when they got to the clearing, there was the kind old man with another lovely picnic spread out in front of him with all of their favourite foods to eat. And he smiled at them and said, wow, you took a long time. I've been waiting here for you for ages. Come and have breakfast with me. And Lolaja's mother said, can you lift the curse? The wise old man laughed and said, it's done. And Yusefi found himself standing on the grass, on his own 2 feet, a human boy again. And Lolaja was turned back into a human girl, still cuddled up in her mother's arms, safe and sound, warm and cozy. And you can be sure as sure that all of them lived happily ever after. That was the story of Lolaja. I learned it from Areej, a wonderful young Palestinian storyteller in Gaza who told it at the World Storytelling Cafe. Thank you, Areej. It's a lovely story.